The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Cathedral, casting rainbow patterns across the pristine white wedding dress. Rose petals lined the aisle, and soft violin music filled the air as guests chatted quietly in their seats. In the bridal room, final touches were being made to the bride's makeup while her mother dabbed away tears of joy. "You look absolutely beautiful," her best friend whispered, adjusting the delicate lace veil. The bride's hands trembled slightly as she checked her reflection one last time. Everything was perfect. The dress she'd dreamed of since childhood, the cascading bouquet of white roses and baby's breath, and the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Little did she know that her perfect day was about to crumble around her. The first sign that something was wrong came when the wedding coordinator poked her head into the room, her face tight with concern. "The groom, he's not in his dressing room." The words hung heavy in the air, but everyone rushed to reassure the bride. "Oh, he's probably just getting some air. You know how nervous grooms can be." But as minutes ticked by, the whispers grew louder. The bride's phone buzzed in her purse, and when she reached for it, her stomach dropped. One simple text message was about to change her life forever. "I can't do this. I'm sorry." The world seemed to stop. The violin music in the background faded to a dull hum. Her mother's gasp, her best friend's curse, the wedding coordinator's frantic phone calls, all of it became background noise as she stared at those 5 words on her screen. "He's not coming," she said quietly, her voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening in her heart. "He's not coming." What followed was a blur of motion and emotion. Her father, usually so composed, stormed through the church looking for the runaway groom. Her mother tried to shield her from the curious eyes of guests who were beginning to realize something was terribly wrong. Her bridesmaids formed a protective circle around her as she sat, still in her perfect dress, trying to make sense of what was happening. The next few hours were a parade of awful moments. Someone had to tell the guests. The caterers had to be called. The honeymoon tickets needed to be cancelled. Through it all, the bride sat in shocked silence, her mind replaying every moment of their relationship, searching for signs she might have missed. They'd met 3 years ago at a friend's housewarming party. He was charming, successful, and seemed completely devoted to her. Their relationship had been a whirlwind of romantic dates, family gatherings, and plans for the future. He proposed on a beach at sunset, gone ring shopping with her mother, helped pick out the wedding venue. How could someone fake all of that? That evening, after the chaos had died down, she sat alone in her apartment, still wearing her wedding dress because she couldn't bear to take it off. It felt like admitting defeat. Her best friend had offered to stay, but she needed space to process what had happened. She didn't know it yet, but there was more to this story than a runaway groom. Their last night together, just weeks before the wedding, had left her with something that would change her life forever. But for now, she sat in the growing darkness, watching her phone light up with messages of concern and support, feeling like her life had been shattered into a million pieces. The next morning, she woke up on her couch, makeup smeared, hair a mess, still in her wedding dress. The sun was rising again, just like it had the day before, as if the world hadn't completely changed. Her first thought was that it had all been a nightmare, but the notifications on her phone confirmed the harsh reality. She finally changed out of her wedding dress, carefully hanging it in the back of her closet. As she did so, something strange happened. Instead of crying, she felt a spark of anger. Not just at him, but at herself for believing in fairy tales. She'd always prided herself on being independent and strong, yet she'd handed over her happiness to someone who couldn't even face her to say goodbye. Over the next few days, she went through the motions of canceling honeymoon reservations and returning wedding gifts. Her mother worried about her calm demeanor, expecting a breakdown that hadn't come yet. But something was keeping her going, a strange feeling that this wasn't the end of her story, but rather the beginning of something else. What she didn't know was that she was already carrying a secret. In the weeks to come, that secret would turn her world upside down again, but this time it would give her a strength she never knew she had. The morning sickness she'd attributed to wedding stress wasn't stress at all. And soon, she would discover that fate had an even bigger surprise in store for her. As she boxed up his things that he'd left at her place, she found a photo of them from their first vacation together. They looked so happy, so in love. She almost threw it away but decided to keep it. Someday, she thought, she might want to remember why she dodged a bullet. Someone who could walk away like that wasn't the person she thought he was. Her friends rallied around her, organizing girls' nights and keeping her busy. But in quiet moments, like when she was making coffee in the morning or driving to work, the question would creep in, what if? What if she'd seen the signs? What if she'd pushed too hard for commitment? What if she wasn't enough? But life has a way of answering these questions in unexpected ways. And as the first part of her story came to a close, she had no idea that the biggest adventure of her life was just beginning. The universe was about to show her that sometimes when life seems to be falling apart, it's actually falling into place. As autumn leaves began to fall outside her window, she started feeling different. At first, she blamed it on the emotional trauma of the failed wedding, but soon she would discover that her story was about to take a turn that no one could have predicted. The man who left her at the altar had no idea what he was walking away from, or what he would come running back for in the future. 3 weeks after the wedding that never was, she sat in her doctor's office, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. The morning sickness that had plagued her for days wasn't just stress or anxiety. It was something that would change her life forever. "We should do an ultrasound to confirm how far along you are," her doctor said gently, noting the shocked expression on her face. She hadn't even suspected pregnancy. Her mind had been so consumed with the wedding disaster that she blamed all her symptoms on stress. As she lay on the examination table, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts raced. A baby? Now? Alone? The cool gel on her stomach made her flinch, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. The doctor's face changed as she moved the ultrasound wand. First confusion, then surprise, then a small smile. "Well," she said slowly, "I'm seeing something quite unexpected here." The bride who wasn't turned to look at the screen, not quite sure what she was seeing. The doctor pointed to the monitor. "Here's one, and here's another, and—" She paused, moving the wand slightly. "Yes, there are 4 separate heartbeats." The room started spinning. "4," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You mean?" "Quadruplets," the doctor confirmed. 4 babies. It's quite rare naturally, but all 4 appear to be developing normally. She lay there, trying to process this information. 1 baby had seemed overwhelming enough, but 4. The universe certainly had a sense of humor. The man who couldn't commit to marriage had unknowingly helped create not 1 but 4 new lives. The drive home from the doctor's office was a blur. She kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on her still flat stomach, where 4 tiny lives were growing. 4 babies who would need clothes, food, diapers. 4 college funds to think about. 4 of everything. When she walked into her apartment, she looked around with new eyes. The spare room she'd been using as a home office would need to become a nursery. But how do you fit 4 cribs in one room? The questions kept coming, each one bigger than the last. She sat down on her couch and did something she hadn't done since the wedding day. She cried. Not tears of sadness or anger this time, but tears of overwhelming emotion, fear, excitement, worry, and strangely, joy all mixed together. Her hand shook as she picked up her phone to call her mother. How do you even begin to tell your family something like this? She took a deep breath and dialed. "Mom, can you come over? I need to tell you something important." An hour later, her mother sat beside her on the couch, both of them staring at the ultrasound pictures spread out on the coffee table. 4 babies, her mother kept repeating, as if saying it would make it more believable. "I can't do this alone," she whispered, voicing her biggest fear. Her mother grabbed her hand firmly. "You are not alone. You have me, your father, your sister, our whole family. We will figure this out together." Over the next few days, the news spread through her family and close friends. Each person's reaction was a mixture of shock, excitement, and concern. Her sister immediately offered to move in to help. Her best friend started researching multiple baby strollers and car seats. Her father, a quiet man usually, began making lists of everything they'd need to modify in her apartment. The support was overwhelming, but so were the logistics. Her job as a graphic designer could be done from home, but would she be able to work with 4 newborns? How would she manage the medical bills? The questions kept piling up, but somehow, instead of feeling crushed by them, she felt herself growing stronger. She started researching everything she could about multiple pregnancies. She joined online support groups for mothers of multiples. She learned terms like selective reduction, a choice some doctors recommend for pregnancies with multiple babies, but in her heart, she already knew she wanted to keep all four, despite the risks and challenges. Her doctor referred her to a specialist in high-risk pregnancies. The new doctor was direct but kind. "This won't be easy," she warned. "You'll need to take extra precautions, and there's a high chance of premature birth." But many women successfully carry quadruplets to a safe delivery date. As weeks passed, her body began to change. Her once flat stomach started to round out sooner than in a single pregnancy. She found herself hungry all the time, craving the strangest combinations of foods. Sleep became precious as finding a comfortable position grew more challenging. But something else was happening too. With each passing day, she felt more connected to the tiny lives growing inside her. When she learned that babies can hear in the womb, she started reading stories out loud, imagining 4 pairs of tiny ears listening to her voice. Her living room became command central for Operation Quadruplets, as her friends jokingly called it. Pinterest boards filled with nursery ideas. Spreadsheets tracked everything they'd need to buy. Her sister started planning how to convert the spare room into a functional space for 4 babies. One evening, as she sat surrounded by baby books and pregnancy magazines, she found herself thinking about him, the man who'd left her at the altar. Should she tell him? Did he have a right to know? The thought of him finding out from someone else made her uneasy, but the idea of reaching out to him was even worse. For now, she decided this was her journey. These babies were her miracle, her challenge, her adventure. She placed both hands on her growing belly and made a promise to her unborn children. "We're going to be okay. We have each other, and we have so many people who love us already." As her first trimester came to an end, she realized something profound. The wedding that didn't happen wasn't an ending at all. It was the beginning of something far more amazing than she could have imagined. Sometimes life's biggest blessings come disguised as its biggest disappointments. She still had a long way to go, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time since reading that devastating text message on her wedding day, she felt truly excited about the future. 4 tiny heartbeats had given her something she thought she'd lost forever: hope. Little did she know that this was just the beginning of an even more complicated story, one that would test her strength in ways she never expected. But for now, she focused on growing her babies and preparing for the biggest adventure of her life. Life has a way of pushing you to grow when you least expect it. As her pregnancy progressed, she found herself transforming not just physically, but in every possible way. Her home office, once filled with design work and creative projects, was slowly becoming a carefully planned nursery for 4. The walls, previously covered in artwork and inspiration boards, now displayed color swatches in soft yellows and gentle greens. Her sister had moved in, taking over the small guest room, bringing in energy and optimism that filled the apartment. Together, they spent evenings assembling cribs, organizing tiny clothes, and planning for the future. Her online business started almost by accident. One night, unable to sleep due to her growing belly, she began designing baby milestone cards. But not the usual ones. These were special, made for multiple births, with humor and heart. She posted them on a crafting website, and within days, orders started flowing in. "You've found a niche," her sister said, watching her pack another set of orders. "There are so many parents of multiples looking for things like this." The business grew steadily, and soon she was creating custom birth announcements, growth charts, and nursery art, all specifically designed for families with multiple babies. Her doctor visits became more frequent as her pregnancy progressed. Each appointment brought new challenges and adjustments. "You're doing amazingly well," her doctor would say, checking the growth of each baby. "But we need to start thinking about reducing your workload." The pregnancy was getting harder. Simple tasks like climbing stairs or loading the dishwasher became major achievements. Her ankles swelled, her back ached, and sleep became a distant memory. But every discomfort was worth it when she saw those 4 tiny hearts beating on the ultrasound screen. Her parents visited every weekend, her father quietly installing safety features around the apartment while her mother cooked meals for the freezer. "You'll thank me when the babies come," she'd say, labeling another container of homemade soup. The nursery transformation was a family project. Her brother-in-law, handy with tools, built custom shelving units to maximize the space. Friends pitched in with painting and decorating. Even her elderly neighbor contributed, knitting 4 matching blankets in different pastel shades. One Saturday morning, as she waddled into the kitchen for breakfast, she found her sister organizing a delivery of diapers. "I did the math," her sister explained, surrounded by boxes. 4 babies go through about 40 diapers a day. That's over 1,200 diapers a month. The numbers were staggering. Everything multiplied by 4 seemed impossible at first, but somehow they were making it work. Her online business was growing, providing a steady income she could maintain from home. Her sister had arranged to work remotely for the first 6 months after the babies arrived. Their mother had already scheduled her retirement to coincide with the births. But it wasn't just practical preparations happening. Something deeper was changing within her. The woman who had once needed someone else's validation to feel complete was disappearing. In her place, a stronger person was emerging, someone who faced challenges head-on, who planned and adapted, who wasn't afraid of an uncertain future. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she would sit in the nursery's rocking chair, running her hands over her growing belly. "You 4 are teaching me so much already," she'd whisper to her unborn babies. Each kick and movement was a reminder that she was never really alone. Her pregnancy became somewhat of a local sensation. At the grocery store, the bank, even walking down the street, people would stop to talk about the quadruplets. Some offered advice, others shared stories, and many just wanted to wish her well. The community support touched her deeply. The online mothers groups became her lifeline. Other mothers of multiples shared their experiences, offered tips, and provided emotional support. "The first year is the hardest," they told her, "but it's also magical. You'll find strength you never knew you had." As her due date approached, the preparations intensified. Hospital bags were packed and repacked. Routes to the hospital were timed at different hours of the day. A phone tree was established for when labor began. Her sister installed an app on everyone's phones to coordinate schedules once the babies arrived. Her business continued to grow, almost as quickly as her belly. She hired a virtual assistant to help with order processing, allowing her to focus on design work during her increasingly limited periods of energy. The income helped ease her worries about the future, though the thought of managing work and 4 newborns still kept her up at night. One evening, as she reviewed the birth plan with a doctor, reality hit hard. "Given the nature of multiple births, we need to be prepared for anything," the doctor explained gently. "The babies might need time in the NICU. Are you ready for that possibility?" She wasn't ready, not really, but she was determined. The nursery was prepared, freezer meals were stocked, and support systems were in place. Her sister had become her rock, her parents her safety net, and her friends her cheerleaders. The last few weeks of pregnancy were the hardest. Moving became a monumental task. Sleep was elusive. Every twinge and movement brought questions. Was this it? Was it time? The doctor had warned that quadruplets often came early, so everyone was on high alert. Yet in these challenging moments, she found herself feeling strangely peaceful. The woman who had been left at the altar seemed like a different person now. That day, which had felt like the end of her world, had actually been the beginning of something extraordinary. Her last project before the babies arrived was a series of letters, one for each child, to be opened on their 18th birthday. In them, she wrote about her hopes, her fears, and the incredible journey that had brought them into her life. She wrote about strength, about love, and about how sometimes life's biggest disappointments lead to its greatest gifts. As she sealed the last envelope, she felt the familiar flutter of movement in her belly. 4 tiny lives, already changing the world in their own way. She didn't know what challenges tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to face them. Little did she know that the biggest challenge of all was just around the corner, and it would test every ounce of strength she had built up over these months of preparation. The babies decided to make their appearance on a quiet Tuesday morning, 6 weeks before their due date. She woke up feeling different, and within hours, the carefully planned birth scenario was in full swing. Her sister called the doctor while her mother grabbed the pre-packed hospital bags. The drive to the hospital was surreal. Between contractions, she watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Her sister held her hand, timing contractions on her phone, while their mother called family members from the front seat. The hospital was ready for them. Multiple birth deliveries were always treated with extra care. A team of doctors and nurses moved with practiced efficiency, checking monitors and preparing for every possibility. 4 tiny heartbeats filled the room, strong and steady. "Everything looks good," the lead doctor assured her, "but we'll need to do a C-section. Are you ready?" "Ready?" How could anyone be truly ready for a moment like this? But she nodded, squeezing her sister's hand. The operating room was bright and cold, filled with medical staff, separate teams for each baby. Someone counted the medical personnel, 23 people in total, all focused on bringing 4 new lives safely into the world. Time seemed to blur. She was aware of voices, of movement, of her sister's encouraging words near her head. And then, suddenly, a cry, the first baby. "A girl," someone announced. Before she could process that, another cry joined in. "A boy." Then another girl, and finally another boy. 4 babies, born within minutes of each other. Each one tiny but perfect, each with their own unique cry. They were whisked away to waiting incubators, a necessity for premature quadruplets. She caught glimpses of small, pink faces as they passed. The next few hours were a whirlwind of recovery room activities and updates about the babies. All 4 were doing well, though they needed time in the NICU. They were small, the biggest just over 4 pounds, the smallest barely 3, but their doctors were optimistic. When she was finally able to visit them, the NICU nurse carefully wheeled her to their incubators. 4 tiny beings, connected to monitors and tubes, yet somehow so completely perfect. The nurse helped her reach through the incubator openings to touch each baby's hand. "They know you're their mother," the nurse said softly, watching as each baby responded to her touch. "They recognize your voice from all those months of talking to them." Naming them was a family affair. She'd had lists prepared, but seeing their faces changed everything. The firstborn girl, the one who announced their arrival with the strongest cry, received a name meaning brave. The first boy, who held his sister's hand in the incubator, got a name meaning light. The second girl, smallest but most active, earned a name meaning wisdom, and the last boy, who seemed to watch everything with curious eyes, received a name meaning peace. The NICU became their second home. She spent every possible moment there, learning to care for these tiny beings who depended on her completely. Her sister and mother took shifts, ensuring someone was always with the babies. They learned the rhythms of the NICU, the beeping of monitors, the quiet efficiency of nurses, the careful monitoring of each baby's progress. Gradually, the babies grew stronger. One by one, they were freed from various tubes and wires. The first time she was able to hold all 4 at once, with plenty of help and support, she cried. They were so small against her chest, but their hearts beat strong and steady. After 6 weeks in the NICU, the first baby was ready to go home. The others followed over the next 2 weeks. Bringing them home was both terrifying and wonderful. The carefully prepared nursery suddenly seemed very real as they placed each baby in their designated crib. The system they'd planned during pregnancy kicked into action. Her mother took the night shift, her sister the early morning, allowing her some much-needed rest between feedings. Friends delivered meals, did laundry, and ran errands. The community they'd built during her pregnancy proved invaluable. Those first few weeks at home were a blur of feedings, diaper changes, and precious moments of sleep. The babies needed to eat every 3 hours, and with 4 of them, it felt like someone was always hungry. They developed a careful choreography of care, warming bottles, changing diapers, soothing cries. But there were magical moments too. The way all 4 babies would fall silent when she sang, even if they'd been crying seconds before. The first time they all smiled on the same day. The way they seemed to communicate with each other through looks and touches. Her online business adapted to her new reality. She worked during their naps, designing between feedings, answering emails one-handed while holding a baby. Surprisingly, her sales increased. Other mothers of multiples found her products even more relatable now. Each baby's personality began to emerge. The firstborn remained the leader, often crying to alert when one of her siblings needed attention. The first boy was the calm one, rarely crying unless truly uncomfortable. The smallest girl was the adventurous one, reaching milestones first despite her size. And the youngest boy watched everything with intense curiosity. Time seemed to move differently now. Days blurred together in an endless cycle of care. But then suddenly she'd realize another week had passed, marked by new developments and tiny changes in each baby's face. She kept a journal, documenting each milestone 4 times over. First smiles, first laughs, first attempts at rolling over. Every achievement was celebrated 4 times, each one special in its own way. The challenges were enormous. The logistics of getting 4 babies to doctor appointments, the constant laundry, the military precision scheduling required for every outing. But the joy was equally enormous. 4 times the hugs, 4 times the smiles, 4 times the love. Looking at her babies, she sometimes thought about their father, wondering if he had any idea what he'd walked away from. But those thoughts came less and less frequently. Her life was fuller than she'd ever imagined it could be. As the babies approached their 2-month milestone, she finally felt like she was finding her rhythm. It wasn't easy, but it was beautiful in its own chaotic way. She was more tired than she'd ever been, but also more fulfilled. What she didn't know was that her carefully constructed new normal was about to face its biggest challenge yet. Someone from the past was about to reappear, bringing with them a storm that would shake the foundation of everything she built. 2 years had passed in a whirlwind of first steps, first words, and countless precious moments when the past came knocking on her door. It started with a phone call from an old friend, one who had attended the almost wedding. "He knows," the friend said quietly. "Someone showed him your social media post about the kid's 2nd birthday party. He's coming back." The news hit her like a physical blow. She looked at her 4 toddlers playing in the living room, building block towers just to knock them down, giggling at their own game. They were perfect, happy, complete. The thought of anything disrupting their peaceful life made her stomach churn. She'd built a good life for them. Her online business had grown into a successful company specializing in products for multiple births. The spare room that once held her office was now a colorful playroom. Her sister had stayed, becoming an essential part of their family unit. The kids were thriving, each developing their own distinct personality. The oldest girl was the natural leader, always making sure her siblings were included in every activity. The first boy had become the peacemaker, sharing his toys without complaint. The smaller girl was still the daredevil, always the first to try something new. And the youngest boy remained the observer, taking everything in with thoughtful eyes. That evening, after the kids were asleep, she called a family meeting. Her parents, sister, and closest friends gathered in her living room, concern evident on their faces as she shared the news. "He's coming back." After all this time, her mother's voice shook with anger. "What right does he think he has?" Her father, usually quiet, spoke up. "He may have legal rights. We need to be prepared for that possibility." They were right, of course. She'd never legally prevented him from being part of the children's lives. He'd done that himself by disappearing. Now, 2 years later, he was a successful corporate lawyer in another city. She'd heard bits and pieces about his life through mutual acquaintances, but had never reached out. Neither had he until now. The next morning, as she helped the kids with breakfast, every knock at the door made her jump. Her sister noticed and took over the morning routine, giving her a chance to collect her thoughts. She watched her children, seeing pieces of him in their features, the way one boy tilted his head when confused, how the older girl's eyes crinkled when she smiled. The message came through email first, professional, formal. He wanted to meet, to talk about the children. He expressed regret for his past actions and a desire to be part of their lives. The words were perfectly crafted, exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer. She took her time responding, consulting with a family lawyer first. The legal situation was complicated. He had never signed away his parental rights, though he'd also never attempted to claim them until now. His abandonment would work in her favor, but nothing was certain. When she finally agreed to meet, she chose a public place. A quiet cafe where they'd once shared happy moments. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her sister watched the kids, and her best friend waited nearby, ready to provide support if needed. He looked different, more polished, in an expensive suit that spoke of his success, but his eyes were the same, and seeing them brought back a flood of memories she thought she'd dealt with. "I saw their picture," he said after an awkward greeting. "They're beautiful. I had no idea." "How could you?" She replied calmly. "You never gave me a chance to tell you. You disappeared completely. The conversation that followed was difficult. He spoke of regret, of growing up, of wanting to make things right. He showed her pictures of a home he bought, with a big backyard and rooms already furnished for children. He talked about private schools and trust funds. But he hadn't been there for the midnight feedings. He hadn't heard their first words or seen their first steps. He hadn't sat in doctors' offices worrying about every small fever. He hadn't known their fears, their favorites, their individual personalities that made them uniquely themselves. They're not a package deal, she told him firmly. They're 4 individual people. They have their own likes, dislikes, fears, and dreams. You can't just walk in with presents and promises and expect to become their father. His face fell at her words. Perhaps he'd expected her to be the same person he'd left, someone who would eagerly accept his return. But she wasn't that person anymore. Motherhood had changed her in fundamental ways. As they talked, she realized something important. She wasn't angry anymore. The pain he'd caused had been transformed into strength. Every challenge she'd faced as a single mother had made her more capable, more confident. "I won't keep you from them," she said finally. "But we do this my way. Slowly, with professional help. They need stability and security. Their well-being comes first." He agreed, though she could see the frustration in his eyes. He was used to getting his way now, but this wasn't a corporate negotiation. These were children's lives, her children's lives. As she drove home that day, her mind was already planning next steps. They would need a family therapist, a formal custody agreement, a structured plan for introducing him into their lives. The peace she built for her family was about to face its biggest test. What she didn't know then was that this was just the beginning of a complex journey, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about forgiveness, co-parenting, and the true meaning of family. Watching her 4 little ones run to greet her at the door, their faces bright with joy, she made a silent promise. No matter what happened next, she would protect their happiness. They were her miracle, her strength, her reason for everything. And nothing, not even their father's return, would change that. The legal battle began quietly, with letters from lawyers and scheduled mediation sessions. She never wanted it to reach this point, but when he filed for joint custody just 3 weeks after their first meeting, she knew she had to fight. The courthouse became a familiar place. Each hearing brought new tensions, new arguments to consider. Her lawyer, a kind woman who specialized in family law, helped her navigate the complex legal system while keeping the children's best interests at the forefront. He's their biological father, his lawyer would argue, presenting documents showing his stable income, new home, and character references. He has a right to be part of their lives. Her lawyer would counter with evidence of his abandonment, the stable environment she'd created, and expert testimony about the potential psychological impact on the children of sudden changes in their routine. The hardest part was keeping the legal battle from affecting the kids. At 2 years old, they were too young to understand why Mommy sometimes came home with red eyes, or why their aunt seemed more protective than usual during their park visits. One morning, as she helped the kids get ready for daycare, her oldest girl asked, "Mommy's dad?" The simple question nearly broke her. How do you explain such complex adult problems to a toddler? She hugged her daughter tight, assuring her that everything was okay. The court-appointed child psychologist interviewed her extensively about the children's routines, development, and emotional well-being. The expert's report would be crucial in determining what arrangement would best serve the children's interests. During one particularly tense mediation session, he brought up her social media presence. Her successful business, built around helping other parents of multiples, meant she often shared aspects of their family life online. "You've been profiting from my children," he accused. "I've been supporting our children," she corrected firmly. "Every post, every product, every decision has been about giving them the best possible life." The mediator suggested they take a break, and in that quiet moment, she found herself thinking about how much had changed. The man across the table wasn't the same person who'd left her at the altar, but she wasn't the same woman either. They were both different people now, trying to navigate an impossible situation. As the legal proceedings continued, more details about his life emerged. After leaving her, he'd thrown himself into his career, climbing the corporate ladder rapidly. But seeing the children's photo had shaken him, making him question his life choices. Now he wanted to make amends, to be the father he should have been from the start. But parenting couldn't be learned from books or bought with a big house and toys. She'd learned that through countless sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and thousands of small daily decisions. The bond she had with her children was built on time, presence, and unconditional love. The court ordered them to attend co-parenting counseling. Their first session was awkward, filled with unspoken accusations and old hurts. The counselor, a patient woman with decades of experience, helped them focus on the future rather than the past. Your children need both of you, the counselor explained, but they need you to work together, not against each other. As weeks passed, more details about his past behavior came to light. Former friends and colleagues came forward, sharing stories of other relationships he'd abandoned when things got serious. A pattern emerged, one of running away when responsibilities became too real. Her lawyer used this information carefully, not to attack his character, but to advocate for a gradual transition plan. The children need consistency, she argued. Any changes to their routine should be implemented slowly, with professional supervision. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, during a routine court hearing. He was testifying about his plans for the children when the youngest boy, who was attending daycare nearby, got sick. Without thinking, she got up to leave. "Where are you going?" the judge asked. "My son has a fever," she explained simply. "He needs me." The judge looked at him, still on the stand. "And you, sir? What would you do in this situation?" His hesitation spoke volumes. He talked about having a nanny on call, about arranging for care, about managing the situation. But she was already halfway out the door, focused only on getting to her sick child. That moment changed everything. The judge called both lawyers to her chambers, and when they emerged, there was a new proposal on the table: supervised visitation, gradually increasing over time, with mandatory counseling for both parents and regular evaluations of the children's well-being. He finally agreed, perhaps realizing that parenting wasn't about legal rights or material provisions. It was about being there, consistently, through fevers and tantrums and everyday moments. The final custody agreement was complex but clear. He would have supervised visits initially, with the potential for overnight stays after 6 months of consistent involvement and positive evaluations from the children's therapist. All major decisions about the children's health, education, and welfare would remain primarily with her, with him being consulted and informed. As she left the courthouse that final day, she felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The legal battle was over, but a new challenge was beginning. Now they had to figure out how to be parents together while remaining separate people with different lives. Looking at the thick folder of legal documents in her hands, she realized this wasn't really an ending. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in their complicated family story. The real work of co-parenting was about to begin, and it would take all the strength, patience, and wisdom she'd gained over the past 2 years to make it work. That evening, watching her 4 little ones playing in their familiar routine, she knew she'd made the right decision. Whatever came next, their happiness and stability would always be her priority. The legal battle had been tough, but it had given them a framework for moving forward, one that put the children's needs first. The first supervised visit was on a sunny Saturday morning in a family center. The kids, now approaching their 3rd birthday, were more interested in the new toys than the nervous man watching them play. She sat quietly in the corner, her heart doing flip-flops as she watched their first interaction with their father. "They're so big," he whispered, almost to himself. The court-appointed supervisor gently encouraged him to join their play, showing him how to approach them at their level. The oldest girl, always the brave one, was the first to accept his offered toy. The others watched their sister, then slowly began to include him in their games. By the end of that first visit, the youngest boy had fallen asleep in his arms, and she saw tears in his eyes. Months passed, and a routine developed. Weekly supervised visits became bi-weekly, then regular weekend afternoons. The children began to look forward to daddy days, though they still ran to her first when they were hurt or scared. Co-parenting wasn't easy. They disagreed on everything from bedtimes to birthday presents. But slowly, with help from their counselor, they learned to communicate. Not as former lovers or adversaries, but as 2 people focused on what was best for their children. Her online business continued to grow, now including resources for co-parenting multiples. She found that sharing her journey, while keeping private details private, helped other parents navigate similar situations. The community she built became a source of strength and support. The children's third birthday party was the first big test of their new arrangement. They decided to host it together at a local park. Her family watched cautiously as he helped set up decorations and organize games. But when the youngest girl scraped her knee and ran crying to both of them, something shifted. They worked together naturally, one cleaning the scratch while the other distracted her with a story. "We're actually doing this," he said afterward, as they watched the kids demolish their birthday cake. "We're being parents." She nodded, remembering how impossible this had seemed a year ago. "They deserve both of us," she replied. "The best versions of both of us." As the seasons changed, so did their family dynamic. He proved consistent in his visits, never missing a scheduled time, always calling when promised. The children began sharing stories about their time with him, excited to tell her about the games they played or books they read. Her sister, who had been their fierce protector through everything, gradually relaxed her guard. "He's really trying," she admitted one evening, watching him teach the boys how to build a proper block tower. The biggest surprise came during a routine parent-teacher conference at their preschool. The teacher praised how well-adjusted the quadruplets were, noting their strong sense of security. "Whatever you two are doing," she said, looking at both parents, "it's working." There were still hard moments. The first overnight visit was difficult for everyone. She barely slept, despite knowing they were safe in the home she'd carefully inspected. The children came back the next day full of stories but extra clingy, needing reassurance that their world was still secure. Holiday planning became an exercise in compromise. They created new traditions that allowed the children to celebrate with both families. Thanksgiving lunch with one, dinner with the other. Christmas morning at home with her, Christmas evening at his house. One day, watching him drive away with the kids for his scheduled weekend, she realized something important. The anger was gone. Not just buried or ignored, but truly gone. In its place was a different kind of understanding. They weren't meant to be married, but they were meant to be these children's parents. Their story began appearing in parenting magazines and blogs. People were fascinated by how they'd moved from a broken engagement to successful co-parenting of quadruplets. When asked for advice, she always said the same thing: "Put the children first. Everything else will follow." The children continued to grow and thrive. Each developed their own special bond with their father while maintaining their close relationship with her. The oldest girl loved helping him cook. The first boy shared his interest in building things. The smaller girl got him interested in art, while the youngest boy introduced him to the joys of bug collecting. As their fourth birthday approached, she found herself working late one night on a new project, a book about their journey. Not a story of revenge or bitterness, but one of growth, forgiveness, and putting children's needs first. Looking at old photos for the book, she found the wedding dress still hanging in the back of her closet. With a smile, she donated it to a charity shop. That chapter of her life was truly over, replaced by something she never could have imagined on that painful day. The last photo in her book showed all 6 of them at the children's recent dance recital, her, him, and their 4 beautiful kids. Not a conventional family, but a family nonetheless. The caption read, "Sometimes the best endings aren't what we originally planned." Their story wasn't perfect. Co-parenting 4 children between 2 households would always have its challenges, but they'd found their rhythm, their way of making it work. The kids were happy, secure, and loved, and in the end, that was all that mattered. As she finished the final chapter of her book, she remembered something the counselor had said months ago: forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past. It's about choosing to build a better future. Looking at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful in the soft night light, she knew they'd done exactly that. The woman who was left at the altar had disappeared, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than she'd ever thought possible. The man who'd run away had grown into a father who showed up day after day. And their 4 beautiful children were the bridge that connected their separate worlds.